Science fiction is the genre for exploring possibilities. It is our narrative laboratory for projecting humanity into the cold and distant future and asking how emerging technologies will reshape the fabric of civilization. One of the things that we like to speculate on the most is politics and how we might govern worlds we have yet to build. Given that democracy has become the most widely idealized form of government across our modern world, you might naturally expect science fiction to celebrate its eventual triumph. We ought to see futures where interstellar federations are governed by vibrant, hyper-educated galactic parliaments, where deep space colonies vote on municipal taxes via quantum algorithms, and where the fundamental right to choose one's leader is universal. But if you look closely at the most influential science fiction novels, films, and television series of the past half-century, a strange and deeply unsettling pattern emerges. Authentic, functional, thriving democracies are surprisingly difficult to find. Welcome to the Sci-Fi Sophist. My name is Bill, and I am a lifelong science fiction fan. Instead of a democratic renaissance, the futures we see often in sci-fi are overwhelmingly ruled by megacorporations, military organizations, scientific elites, artificial intelligences, absolute emperors, or vast, faceless bureaucracies. Even when democratic institutions do manage to exist on screen, they are frequently portrayed as weak, corrupt, indecisive, and fundamentally incapable of responding to existential threats. Science fiction is usually considered the ultimate playground for human ingenuity, progress, and optimism, yet when it comes to the collective management of human societies, it appears deeply skeptical of popular rule. What is driving this distrust? Is it a sign that sci-fi creators secretly harbor authoritarian tendencies? I don't think so. In fact, the major stories of the genre explicitly expose and condemn tyranny. The villains are almost always the monopolists, the dictators, the fascists, the mindless automatons. Individual freedom remains the most cherished value in science fiction, not necessarily through the framework of institutional liberty itself, but through the rebellious individuals who fight to reclaim it. This leaves us with some deeply uncomfortable questions that sci-fi forces us to confront. Can a representative government actually move fast enough to survive existential, high-tech crises? What happens to human voting when algorithms can predict, manipulate, and shape our desires simultaneously? Are elected politicians fundamentally unequipped to regulate technologies that expand exponentially faster than the legislative process? And perhaps most profoundly, does the practical reality of democracy simply break down once a civilization scales beyond a single planet? Philosophers from Plato onward have questioned whether a system that relies on the average consensus can ever produce wise, far-sighted leadership. Science fiction takes this ancient anxiety and supercharges it with advanced technology. It forces us to wrestle with the reality that human beings struggle immensely with long-term systemic risks when the next election cycle is mere years away, while the stakes of the future are exponentially high. To understand why democracy is so rare in speculative fiction, we have to start with a simpler, more practical truth. Drama depends on conflict, stakes, and decisiveness. And democracy, by its very design, is a system built on compromise, deliberate delays, institutional checks and balances. No lone individual, no matter how brilliant or virtuous, is supposed to have absolute control over a democratic society. But a 2-hour movie or a tight serialized television episode doesn't have 6 months to wait for a Senate Appropriations Committee to approve funding for an orbital defense shield. When an alien armada is dropping out of hyperspace, or a rogue asteroid is heading directly for Earth, the immediate emergence of partisan bickering, deadlocked compromises, and committee hearings suddenly look less like a hard-won civil liberty and more like a dangerous, terrifying luxury. An audience understands better an immediate executive command. This explains why so much of science fiction establishes its stories within the framework of a military fleet, a corporate boardroom, or a localized crew of rogue outlaws. In these settings, the focus is narrowed, the stakes are magnified, and decisions can be executed with a single word: fire, engage, or retreat. Audiences want to see protagonists make difficult choices and bear the immediate agonizing consequences of those actions. Success or failure should hinge on a character's bravery, intellect, or morality, not on the outcome of a closed-door bureaucratic caucus. Our collective appetite favors the exceptional individual over the slow-moving committee. This bias creates a subtle but persistent undercurrent across the genre. The insinuation that when the stakes are universal, the rule of law and the will of the majority are things to be circumvented rather than celebrated. Even when a science fiction universe presents us with a world that looks fundamentally hopeful and enlightened, a closer look beneath the hood reveals that true popular rule is still nowhere to be found. Instead, these worlds often substitute democracy with the myth of the enlightened bureaucracy, or the benevolent technocracy. The most prominent example of this is the United Federation of Planets in Star Trek. On its surface, the Federation is portrayed as the zenith of human political achievement, an idealistic, post-scarcity utopia built on mutual cooperation, scientific curiosity, and racial equality. We are told it is a beacon of freedom. But throughout the hundreds of hours of television episodes and films, how often do we actually see a civilian election? How often do we see the citizens of Earth debating domestic policy, voting on resource allocations, or campaigning for political office? Not very often. For all intents and purposes, the Federation is presented as a massive meritocracy run almost exclusively by Starfleet, a disciplined, highly educated, and rigid military scientific organization. Society's biggest, most critical choices are not hammered out by a House of Representatives. They are analyzed and decided upon by elite captains and specialized scientific experts. The underlying assumption of this universe is that humanity's future survival depends on placing our collective destiny into the hands of an exceptionally trained, professionally objective managerial class. The people who run the world are those who have spent decades mastering astrophysics, interstellar diplomacy, and advanced ethics. This framework works beautifully in the context of Star Trek because its main characters like Jean-Luc Picard, Benjamin Sisko, Catherine Janeway, are the embodiments of this ideal. They are moral, philosophically grounded, and intellectual. They use their unchecked executive authority to protect the weak, uphold the Prime Directive, and defend civil liberties. But notice the dilemma this creates. Star Trek constantly invites the audience to applaud when these heroic commanders choose to ignore, bypass, or actively violate the directives of their own civilian superiors or legal protocols whenever they feel their personal moral compass demands it. Captain Kirk ignores regulations all the time. Captain Picard challenges admirals. Captain Sisko deceives governments during wartime. Janeway repeatedly improvises beyond established protocols. Whenever a civilian politician, an ambassador, or a bureaucrat shows up on the bridge of the Enterprise, they are almost universally written as a short-sighted roadblock. They are portrayed as petty, out of touch, compromised by political calculations, or dangerously naive about the harsh realities of the frontier. The message is clear and consistent. The messy nature of politics is a threat to true justice. True safety and progress are achieved when we build the virtuous expert protector to operate entirely outside the constraints of popular oversight. Looking at the cyberpunk subgenre, the traditional nation-state has essentially collapsed, rendered completely obsolete by the speed, agility, and economic dominance of global megacorporations. In worlds like Blade Runner, Neuromancer, or Cyberpunk 2077, the concept of a citizen who casts a ballot has been erased and replaced by the concept of the consumer who purchases a lifestyle. When technology advances to the point where algorithms can map human psychology with precision, where biotechnology can rewrite our genetic code, and where neural networks can actively stream synthetic realities directly into our brains, the foundational premise of democracy breaks down. Democracy requires the existence of a rational voter who can evaluate information, deliberate, and make a free choice. But how can a citizen make a truly free choice when the information they consume, The desires they feel and the very chemical composition of their brains are being quietly monitored and manipulated in real time by a corporate monopoly. The towering headquarters of the Tyrell Corporation dominates the Los Angeles skyline. Later in Blade Runner 2049, the Wallace Corporation inherits an even greater role, effectively directing humanity's expansion beyond Earth through monopolistic control of synthetic labor. This is not merely economic influence, it resembles political sovereignty. Corporations manufacture the workforce. They determine technological development. Citizens appear to possess little ability to influence these decisions through democratic participation. In these hyper-technological futures, popular rule doesn't need to be violently overthrown by a military dictator. It simply fades away, replaced by an optimized, algorithmic ecosystem that keeps the population too entertained, too gig-employed, and too structurally dependent on corporate infrastructure to ever conceive of demanding political self-determination. If Star Trek imagines democracy evolving into technocratic expertise, and Blade Runner imagines it yielding to corporate capitalism, The Expanse presents perhaps the most realistic political future in modern science fiction. Democracy survives, but it becomes extraordinarily difficult. Unlike other franchises, The Expanse retains recognizable governments. Earth remains governed through the United Nations. Mars operates as a disciplined constitutional republic shaped by military necessity. The Belt develops fragmented political organizations struggling for legitimacy. Each reflects institutional compromises produced by geography, history, economics, and survival. This realism distinguishes The Expanse from many earlier works. Earth's leaders govern billions living under immense economic inequality. Martian politicians prioritize collective discipline because transforming an entire planet requires generations of coordinated sacrifice. Belter leaders struggle against colonial exploitation while lacking unified institutions. Every faction possesses understandable motivations. Perhaps the series' greatest political insight is that democracy becomes harder, not easier, as civilizations expand across multiple worlds. Distance itself becomes political. Communication delays complicate governance. Resource inequalities fuel resentment. Distinct planetary identities gradually replace shared national identities. The Expanse illustrates how difficult democratic governance becomes when technological change, military threats, economic inequality, and competing identities converge simultaneously. To me, it is clear that the genre's deep skepticism of popular rule is not an endorsement of tyranny. It shows us worlds where democracy has been broken, bypassed, and forgotten. Sci-Fi is forcing us, though, to look at our own world with a sense of urgency. It uses the amplified lenses of interstellar empires and cyberpunk dystopias to expose the very real, very current fault lines running through our modern civic institutions. The genre warns us that democracy is a fragile, delicate experiment that requires specific conditions to survive: a shared commitment to truth, patience to engage in slow, deliberate civil discourse, and a population's willingness to prioritize long-term collective survival over short-term gratification. I want to know what you guys think about this in the comments below. Do you think Sci-Fi warns us about the threats of modern democracy? Or maybe you think it's just showing us how resilient the democratic experiment really is? Hit like if you enjoyed this video. Thank you for watching, and don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss future videos. Take care, guys.